I want to say hi to everybody who's in this room and those of you who are joining us online this week, and welcome to North Shore Church. If it's your first time here, you've picked a really good weekend to join or be with us this weekend because we're launching this new series called Who Are You Following? And I hope, my prayer, my hope around this series is that this would be kind of a defining moment for us as a church. As we dive into this invitation that Jesus gives to each and every person. So here's the thing. We're going to all go through this together. All of our life groups are going through this. Usually they're doing different curriculums and activities, but this series, all of our life groups are going to be walking through this together. Kids and students ministries will be walking through this together. So if you're not in a life group, it's a great chance to jump into one. You can sign up at guest services, even if it's just for the next 6 weeks, to be part of this conversation and hear what God may have for you in this season or chapter of your life. But I want to start into the message with a few word associations. Pastor named Andy Stanley used an illustration like this once. I thought it could be helpful as we dive in. So some of you will know this word, politician. And when you see this word, most of you know what this means, right? You know, maybe you don't like politicians or you don't like certain politicians or it brings up certain beliefs or values that you don't like. But most people would say, okay, I kind of know what this person's about. How about this one? Electrician. I gotta tell you, I'm like the least handy person on the planet. My wife won't let me change like a light bulb around the house. It's that dangerous. So we'll call someone like this if we need the help. Says, you kind of know with an electrician kind of what it is they're about, what they do, what they're trained to do. How about this one? Vegetarian. You know, most people know exactly what this means. You feel a little bit bad for them, but you know what this means. And I'm just kidding. I love vegetarians. Please, no emails about that. But these are words where you have a pretty clear picture of what these are about. I got one more. Try this one. What about Christian? This can be kind of a confusing word, actually. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people in our day. I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up going to church Sunday after Sunday. I learned stories from the Bible. I sang songs about Jesus. And then when I was 6 years old, I asked Jesus to come into my heart. So question, is that when I became a Christian? Or was it years later when I made a public declaration of my faith through the sacrament of baptism? Is that when I became a Christian? Or was it in high school? And like some of you in high school and college, I got involved in things that, weren't stuff that Christians were supposed to do. And then I went to this youth camp and heard this message and I felt a lot of guilt and shame about how I was living. And so I rededicated my life to God. It's what some people in the church call a rededication moment. And just by the way, that process happened over and over and over through high school. I probably became a Christian like 200 or 300 times, like just always going. And some of you have a story like that, right? This word, it can be a really confusing word. If you were to ask 100 people in our day, what does it mean to be a Christian, or what does it mean to become a Christian? You might get 100 different answers. Some people will tell you it's all about what you believe about God or the Bible or salvation. Some people might tell you it's really all about how you live or how you behave. It's about avoiding premarital sex or not getting drunk or being nice and caring to people. Some people might say it's actually about being associated with the right group of people, the right kind of Christians, if you will. Growing up, I used to be suspicious of certain categories or groups of Christians like Methodists or Lutherans or those scary Presbyterians because Jesus was so clearly a non-denominational Christian like I was, right? So we can have these fears and associations that go with that. And I think it kind of raises the key problem with this word Christian is that I can define it almost however I want to define it. I can make it mean almost whatever I want it to mean. I can define Christian in a way that reflects what I already believe. I can define Christian in a way that reflects kind of my previously held views. I can define Christian in a way that supports my political convictions. I can define Christian in such a way that it makes me look like I'm right with God as opposed to other people who are kind of on the outside looking in. And by the way, I think this is one of the reasons why people can have such negative connotations or associations with that word. Have you ever met someone who just had negative response to using the word Christian or if you said you were a Christian? People associate it with what? Being judgmental, being self-righteous, being arrogant or smug or condescending. People associate it with people who maybe assume they're going to heaven and kind of feel this degree of satisfaction that everybody else is going to hell or stuff like that. And maybe some of you have experienced that personally. Maybe you don't believe in Christianity because you don't trust Christians. But here's the thing, and here's the problem with all this. Jesus never asked anyone to become a Christian. That may sound a little provocative, a little strange, but you can go through all four Gospels. You'll never find him once asking someone to become a Christian. He didn't walk up to Peter and Andrew as they were casting their nets in the water and say, guys, I want you to, come and become a Christian. He didn't go to the rich young ruler and say, you have to give away what you have and become a Christian. You know what he said to them? Follow me. Follow me. In fact, when he met Peter and Andrew, they were casting their nets in the water. He said, put down your nets. Come, follow me. Later, he was teaching a large crowd. He often taught to crowds. Many of those people didn't know him, believe in him, know who he was. And he would say things like this to them. He said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Follow me. And when he had these moments of healing or miraculous acts of power, it wasn't just so that he could do something fancy and kind of wow people or astonish people. It was so people would follow him. He once healed a man who was blind, and then Luke writes this in his gospel. Immediately he received his sight, and what? He followed Jesus. You see, the invitation is the same over and over and over. Follow me. Learn from me. Study my life. Live how I live. Spend time with me. We'll see in a little moment that there is a reason that people started using the word Christian. But even the men and women who associated themselves with Jesus, who spent time with Jesus, who were closest to Jesus, didn't refer to themselves as Christians. They were followers of Jesus. They were students of Jesus. They were disciples of Jesus. In fact, this is really interesting. The word Christian, did you know this? The word Christian only appears 3 times in the whole Bible. 3. Do you know how many times the word disciple appears in the Bible? 269 times. Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference? A disciple is simply someone who's made a decision to learn how to be like Jesus by following Jesus. Let me say that again. A disciple is simply someone who's made a decision to go out in their life and learn how to be like Jesus by following Jesus. The problem is, and too often today in churches today, we call people into greater church activity. And I'm a pastor, so I've been part of things like this. We call people into more and more church activity, but far too often, we don't start with the most fundamental part of all this, which is teaching people what it actually means to follow him in your everyday life, like between Monday and Saturday. And I think this is one of the reasons why so many Christians in our world sadly look nothing like Christ. It's not because they haven't been to church. Many have been to church, hundreds and hundreds of times. It's because they never set out, they never intended to become a follower of Jesus. And at the end of the day, here's the thing, friends. At the end of the day, you will become like who you follow. You will become like whatever or whoever you follow. So for this series, we're going to kind of go back to the fundamental call of Jesus on our lives. Follow me. So if you have questions about who Jesus is, don't miss the next 5 weeks. If you've ever felt stuck or stagnant in your spiritual life, like I'm not sure where God is in this, don't miss the next 5 weeks. If you ever have had wounds or scars from a previous church experience, don't miss the next 5 weeks. If you've been part of this church for a long time and you've been wondering, what's our plan for discipleship? What's the path? What are we actually going to do? Don't miss the next 5 weeks, because we're going to address all those things through the lens of these 2 simple words through which Jesus invited everybody, either explicitly or implicitly, to be with him. Follow me, follow me, follow me. Which brings us to the story we're going to unpack together today, kind of as a preview for what's to come. It's a story written by a man named Matthew, about Matthew's own very first encounter with this man, Jesus. So you're hearing this story firsthand from the person who actually experienced it. Matthew writes this. It's from Gospel of Matthew chapter 9. He says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew, kind of refers to himself in the third person. I love that, right? Not just me, but a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Now, I love that phrase because Matthew, who's writing this letter way later in his life, can't even bring himself to use the word tax collector, which he was, because tax collectors were such, despised lowlifes in that day. People just resented them and hated them and looked down at them. They were traitors to their nation. They exploited the poor. They were considered unclean before God, and not just because they collected taxes for the hated Romans, but because as long as the Romans got their share, these tax collectors could take or extort whatever else they wanted from people. And the Romans, you'll love this in the day we live in, the Romans, they just taxed just about everything in their day. I mean, there was a tax on property, there was a tax on trade, on inheritance, on income, on food. They had a sales tax, a military tax, a light rail tax that would never be finished. I'm just kidding, just a joke. Lighten up, everybody, okay? We're having fun here, right? But guess this, there was also in that day a harbor tax. And the reason that's important is because Matthew, this tax collector, was from a town called Capernaum, which was on the Sea of Galilee, the northern side of the Sea of Galilee. So it's quite likely that Matthew collected taxes from local fishermen who were coming in and out of the docks, which means it's also quite likely he had collected taxes from Andrew and Peter, these two brothers who were fishermen from Capernaum, which means it's also quite likely that Andrew and Peter are with Jesus, like they're right there when Jesus approaches Matthew. So just imagine what they're thinking. This guy that everybody hates, that nobody likes, that's been stealing and cheating and exhorting people. And Jesus walks up and he could say just about anything, right? How dare you, Shame on you. Does your mother know what you're doing out here? Like he could have said pretty much anything. Look at what Jesus says. Follow me. Sees Matthew at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And by the way, this just levels the playing field, doesn't it? I mean, if a guy like Matthew is invited to follow Jesus without having to make any promises, without having to pass a theological exam, without having to pledge his allegiance, this means Jesus could just invite basically anybody. And he would. And he did. And he still does. And it's not like Jesus offers something different or better or more advanced to all those good people who are out there following all the rules. The invitation to everybody was always the same. No matter what's going on in your life, no matter how messy or tidy it may appear to others, the next step is always follow me. Come learn from me. Take a next step with me. And I think this is a huge paradigm shift for a lot of people. Especially if you were raised in an environment where it was either taught or assumed that God somehow prefers like all the rule-following people, right? I mean, isn't that what we think? It's so easy to be in a place where we just assume God's got to prefer the people whose lives are put together or live in the right way. I mean, he has to prefer being around them. But Jesus here kind of breaks the mold and invites Matthew. And I think it's especially important if you've ever experienced judgment from Christians or the church out there. In fact, if that's part of your story, you need to know that's not Jesus' fault. That's the church's fault. And it's because so often in church, we misunderstand the heart of Jesus, who came to love people that nobody loved and call people that nobody would call and receive people with nobody received and want to hang out with people that nobody wanted to hang out with. In fact, it's interesting, a little later in the story, if you were to read the rest of the story, Jesus is actually having dinner at Matthew's house, which was like a huge no-no. Like that would have really raised some eyebrows. And there's a group of Pharisees who were the religious leaders of that day outside kind of whispering and gossiping. And they asked Jesus' disciples this question. They said, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors? And Jesus hears them whispering over in the corner. And he's like, by the way, I'm the Son of God, so I could kind of hear that, right? And then he says this remarkable thing. He says, I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Sinners. And by the way, this had to be a little hard for Matthew to hear, right? Matthew, who's like, he's in his house. Jesus has called me. I'm so excited. And Jesus is like, I haven't called to come the righteous, but, like Matthew, like sinners, like this guy over there. And Matthew's like, who, me? Like, what are you saying? Like, what did I do? And Jesus is like, Matthew, you're a tax collector. Like, you steal from people who are starving. So, yeah, I'm talking about you right now. Now we got to pause here and unpack this word because it can be misunderstood or there's a lot of baggage around in our day. I know sin is not a very popular word. Maybe for you it sounds judgmental or self-righteous. Maybe someone called you a sinner in a way that was hurtful or condescending. And years ago, I remember someone in the church trying to explain sin to me, and they said, your sin makes you the worst person in the world. I was 8, by the way, when that happened. So it's like, how do you process something like that, right? But here's the thing, in the Bible, the word sin just means to miss the mark. It's not like a loaded, like spiritual word. It just means to miss the mark. In fact, it was used when archers would miss the target when they were shooting an arrow. If they missed the target, they sinned. They missed the mark. It wasn't perfect. And here's what's so interesting about the idea of sin. Even people who don't believe in God believe in sin. They may not use that word, but every human being has what? A list of behaviors or actions or attitudes or beliefs that they think are the right ones and others that are the wrong ones, right? You know, you should be more tolerant. You should care for the poor. You should love your kids. Like whatever the should is, like we all have a list. And even more interesting is this, we all miss the mark even with our own standards, don't we? I mean, regardless of what you think God wants you to do, you can't even do what you think you should do, right? I mean, you know you should save, but you don't. You know you should prioritize that relationship or your marriage or your family, but you don't. You know you should stop drinking or indulging in that habit or that action, but you don't. It's a great writer by the name of C.S. Lewis. Some of you know his work. And in this book, Mere Christianity, he says this remarkable things. He says, these are the 2 points I want to make. First, that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it, right? Like we all have this sense that there's a right, there's a wrong, whatever your list is, we all have it. And secondly, they do not in fact behave in that way. Like we can't even follow our own rules. We can't even follow our own list. So when Jesus says, I have not come to call the righteous but sinners, he's not picking on Matthew. He's saying, I'm here for everybody. Because nobody's perfect. You included. And he's looking at the Pharisees when he's saying this, by the way, the religious people. Nobody's perfect, which means, and here's the point, anyone can follow. Anyone can follow. Even if you feel unfit or unqualified, even if you look in the mirror and think there's no way God would want a person like me, Jesus' invitation is the same. Come and follow, come and follow, come and follow. He's leveling the playing field, isn't he? He's leveling the playing field. But here's what else is happening. He's also raising the stakes. Quite a bit, actually. See, becoming a follower of Jesus, I hate to tell you this, becoming a follower of Jesus is much harder than becoming a Christian. Becoming a Christian is easy. All you need to do is say you believe certain things about God or pray a certain kind of prayer and God's got to let you into heaven because you've kind of said the right stuff or believed the right stuff, right? I mean, that's how it's often been presented at times, or that's what I used to believe, and that's easy to do. But following Jesus requires something of you. Following Jesus means you have to go where he wants you to go. Following Jesus means you have to learn what he wants you to learn. Following Jesus means you got to do what he wants you to do. Following Jesus means you got to let him change in you what he wants to change in you. When you think about Matthew, Jesus didn't walk up and say, just believe in me, we'll do a quick prayer moment, then I'll go over there and you can keep doing what you're doing. We'll work it out, you know? He said what? Follow me, which means you're leaving the booth. Like life's gonna be different. A lot of change is coming your way. Because following Jesus always costs you something. I know some of you are thinking, well, what about grace? Like I've heard the word grace and I've been told, or I've heard grace is a free gift, like no cost, it's free, right? And it's free in that God gives it to you freely, just like Jesus gives Matthew this invitation free. But accepting it, receiving it comes at a cost. Kind of an illustration, it's like being gifted a full ride college scholarship. So you parents are thinking, if only that would happen in my family, a full ride college scholarship, right? As a student, it's free to you, like it's free, but guess what? You gotta go to college. You gotta go to class. Like you gotta go learn stuff. And the same is true with Jesus. This invitation, this offer is free to you. It's a gift, but you got to go to class. You got to be a student. You got to learn stuff. Following Jesus means learning a new way of life. And by the way, if you go back to the Gospels, and I encourage you to do this, you'll find some key patterns or categories or areas or components of this new way of life. For example, his disciples were committed to personal transformation. They would practice these spiritual practices that Jesus would do, like studying scripture and prayer and Sabbath, to experience change in their life. Another one, they were committed to doing life in community, not in isolation or competition, but always in community. Another one, they were committed to serving others. They were committed to living generously. So here at North Shore, we have these kind of 4 faith essentials or categories. We've kind of summarized or paraphrased these things. To follow Jesus means spending time with God, connecting in community, serving on a team, and living generously. And if you want to grow, all these things count. And by the way, if you've been to Starting Point here at North Shore, you know this. We've walked through these things. And if you haven't been to Starting Point, even if you've been part of this church for like 40 years, you should sign up and go. You could still sign up. Week 2 is this Tuesday night. And for the next 4 weeks, we're going to walk through each one of these things in depth and talk about what does it look like to follow Jesus in terms of my spiritual life, my personal life, going deeper with him. What's it look like to follow Jesus in community? Not just have like my clique or my group of friends. What's it look like to follow Jesus as I serve and through generosity? We're going to dive into all 4 of those. But here's the thing, and this is what I want you to hear and kind of take with you today. It all starts with a decision that you have to make. Who are you following? Who are you following? Like really, who are you following? So what does Matthew do when Jesus gives this invitation? Follow me, he said. And Matthew got up and did what? He followed him. Like it's so simple, isn't it? Like I'm looking for like where are the footnotes? Like where's like the theologicals? Like what else? We got to have more. That's just too easy. It's too simple, right? He just got up and followed him. He just followed him. Didn't have to take a test. He just got up and went out and he gave Jesus a try. He just gave him a try. And by the way, for those of you who don't believe in Jesus, for those of you who don't like him, you've had a bad experience, you don't think he's the Son of God, you don't think he was raised from the dead, whatever it is, you don't have to figure all that out to give Jesus a try. Just give him a try. Pick up a Bible and read the Gospels. Read the stories about his life. Read it as a skeptic if you want. Just read about his life. And then I dare you to give his lifestyle a try in your life. Like practice loving your enemies instead of hating them. Practice living generously instead of clinging to your stuff like it's all you got. Practice, here's one, admitting your sin and your brokenness instead of hiding it. And as you do these things, see if Jesus does not prove himself to be exactly who he said he was. Because by the way, the first disciples, none of them started with belief. They didn't know who the heck he was. They started by following. And by following and learning and experiencing his power and presence, they became convinced of who he was. So we have to try. And for the rest of us, as simple as this moment in Matthew's life may be, we must not overlook the fact that Matthew actually heard Jesus' voice. Remember, the tax booth was a busy place. People paying taxes, people trying to talk Matthew out of paying taxes. Matthew may have had Roman soldiers around him because remember, this was Rome's money he was collecting. So it would have been easy with all the voices, all the noise, all the distraction, all the chaos to miss 2 little words. Follow me. Like he didn't yell at him. He didn't give him a speech. He didn't kind of get it. Just 2 words in the midst of all the chaos. Follow me. And Matthew heard it. And by the way, one of the reasons why I think people in the church are missing Jesus today, they're missing the voice and the presence and the direction of Jesus today, is because we're surrounded by so many other voices, aren't we? We're following so many other sources of information and guidance and wisdom and whatnot, particularly in the media and on social media. So get this, a little preview for next week. Next Sunday, we're gonna run a little experiment as a church. Starting next Sunday, we're gonna challenge each and every one of you to take a break from all your social media, all cable news, BuzzFeed, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, MySpace, whatever you're following, we're gonna challenge you to unfollow for 7 full days. And here's the thing, some of you are not gonna do it. Some of you won't make it 5 minutes after the service before you're gonna be back consuming those voices. But here's the thing, that's why you're so mad. That's why you're so lost. That's why life feels so confusing to find, because you got so many voices screaming at you. And you think a 30-minute sermon's gonna make a difference in all that? So we're gonna take a week starting next Sunday. And we'll talk more about this coming week. So it's just a preview. So all of you who have to let everybody know I'm going dark for a week, they won't panic like you're dead on the floor in your house. They'll know, okay, this is the thing that's going on. And here's the other thing. If the world's about to end, somebody will call you, okay? So you don't have to worry you're gonna miss out on anything major, okay? But in order to hear Jesus, we've got to silence the other voices. And this experiment is just that. It's just an experiment to show us, to prove how much clutter and noise and distraction we've got. So we're gonna run an experiment next week. We'll hear more about that. But what's even more remarkable about Matthew's story was all that he was willing to leave behind before he fully understood who he was following. I mean, think about it. He had to leave his fears behind. I mean, Matthew would have been scared to death to leave his comfortable, safe, in control little tax booth, right? He'd be so afraid to join a community of people who at that time would have hated him. So much fear. He had to let that fear go. And so will you, whatever your fears are. He had to leave all the excuses behind. I don't have time for this. It's not convenient. I've got other priorities, other demands. He had to let all those excuses go. And so will you if you want to follow Jesus. And guess what? He had to leave his self-reliance behind. See, following Jesus means I'm no longer following the main person I usually follow, which is me. And for you, it's you. See, friends, faith in Jesus is not about waking up and inviting Jesus to come along with you and kind of bless your day as you go. Jesus, just come along. I got these things planned out. Just come along and just bless them so I feel really good about my day. Following Jesus is going, Jesus, where are you going today? What's on your agenda today? What do you have for me as I navigate the situations and circumstances and relationships and challenges of my day? How do I follow you through those things? And friends, that's a costly way to live, isn't it? So question, why did Matthew do it? Why in the world would this guy who didn't know this man, he's a carpenter from Nazareth, he's just rolling through town, he's surrounded by people that hate you. Why would he leave everything behind for this? You know why he did it? Because every day after that moment, he was with Jesus. He was with him. See, following is a relational thing. It's not a religious thing, it's a relational thing. He was with Jesus. He saw Jesus heal the sick. He saw Jesus calm the storm. He saw Jesus raise the dead. He was there. And he was never alone again. See, the tax collector's booth, I love he wrote that phrase because that booth represented all the isolation, all the loneliness, all the insecurity. And guess what? You've got a booth in your own life where you're camped out, afraid, alone, uncertain, what's going to happen, how do I make sure I get through this life? You see, following Jesus is costly, yes. But the greater cost is not following him. The greater cost is not seeing, not learning, not growing, not changing. The real cost is being left to find our way through life under the guidance of cable news and Insta stories. As if that's going to take you where you need to go. And so God did this brilliant thing to bring us back to him. He sent someone to us that we could follow. He sent someone down to our level, a person, a human being that we could see and know and experience and trust and try and follow. Kind of an interesting kind of picture of this. My son, Jude, is a year and a half old. And it means he's old enough to understand me, yeah, which is a good thing. And he's also old enough to totally ignore me. Right? Just completely whatever, I'm not doing what you want. And he's learning to do that quite well. And the hard thing is, I can see all the dangers around him that he can't yet see. I can see the stairs he might fall down, or the road he might walk into. But he's become more and more insistent. He just wants to do things his way. So I've decided to try this new strategy. And God, I just got to say, kind of, parent moment, it's worked really well so far. I will send his sister to him, who is 4.5, down to his level. And by the way, he adores his sister. He trusts his sister. He loves his sister, even though she kind of pushes him around. And I'll say, Nora, go tell Jude to follow you back over here. And she'll go say, Jude, follow me, follow me, follow me. And he'll follow her right where he needs to go. Friends, that is what God has done in the person of Jesus Christ. He sent someone that we could follow. He sent someone that we could trust. He sent someone all the way down to our level. And he's making the same invitation to you right now. Follow me. Follow me in your marriage. Follow me in your work. Follow me in your finances. Follow me in your sexuality. Follow me in your political convictions. Follow me in those difficult relationships. Follow me and become a whole new you. And here's the really cool thing, and with this I'll close. As men and women in the early church did this, as his first disciples did this following Jesus, as they made decisions to become disciples, the world around them began to take notice. They began to see and be amazed at these amazing things these disciples were doing, how they were living, how they were loving, the change they experienced in them. And these non-believing people came up with this one little word to describe these students of Jesus. You know what they called them? Christians. Which just means like little Christs. Because they look just like Jesus. Not just because they believed in him, but because they followed every day. And that's our invitation and our challenge. But you have to make a decision about your life and who you are going to follow. So let's take a moment and pray about that. Jesus, you invite us today in the same way that you invited every person to follow you, to try you, to take a risk, to leave behind what we're clinging and holding to, and step out in faith and walk with you. And Jesus, I will just confess, so often where I lack belief is only because I've lacked following in my life. And so we pray that you would help us take that step right now. And some of you right now, as you're sitting there right now thinking about maybe what's coming later this afternoon or when the service is going to be over, some of you have never made this step or taken this step to actually follow Jesus in your life. Maybe there's been a ton of church activity. Maybe you call yourself a Christian. Maybe you've done the right things, but you've never intended to become a disciple, a student, a follower of this man, Jesus. And so I want to give you a chance to do that right now. You can just say in the quiet of your heart, Jesus, I have decided to follow you. Just tell him right now, Jesus, I have decided to follow you. And by the way, if that's your decision today, I want to challenge you to take out that Connect card as soon as we're done and fill out that card and write the words, I choose Jesus, because tomorrow is Monday and this will feel like a long distant memory, and you need community around you, and we want to help you with that. I have decided to follow you, Jesus. And for the rest of you, my guess is he's calling you right now to follow him in a part of your life where you've long since been maybe ignoring him or avoiding him or just doing it your way. And right now he's come, full of grace, full of power. Follow me in your marriage. Follow me in that relationship. Follow me in that dilemma. Follow me in that pain. Follow me in that doubt. And you can choose that right now. And so Jesus, we together want to say, we have decided today not just to go out and try to be better Christians, but to follow you so that the world might see in us the fullness of who you are. Help us, Jesus. And we love you. Thank you for coming down to our level to call us to follow you. We pray this, and everybody said,